Okay, so now let's make a left. And ooh. Okay, remember, dude, you're only supposed to go after the bots, and I'll leave you be, okay? Gosh, I don't even think this guy sees me. You gonna agree to the... Nope. Truce over! Like, what was he thinking? He can't pen me from the front. Why did he bother? Okay, maybe he hit my fuel tank, but that's just about it. No other damage. Oh well. Howdy folks, Sauber here. Welcome back to the channel. It seems like we didn't have to wait long. 1.77 dev server was released March 4th, 2018 and lasted until early March 5th, 2018. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the armor values of the Abrams and explain why I'm kind of questioning how well effective it will be against its peers. Now, don't get me wrong, it is a tough tank, but it can still get penned from the front by certain other 8.7 or even other early 9.0 tanks. And when I say early 9.0, I'm talking about like the first T64, the MBTs and KPZs, and even the, to a certain degree, the Leopard A1A1, if I recall correctly. Now, the armor is composite armor. Most likely Chobham. Its kinetic energy efficiency, or excuse me, effectiveness is 380 millimeters of effective thickness. Chemical energy, or I said that wrong. Kinetic is like APFSDS or APDS. Chemical is like Heat FS or ATGMs. So we know it can stop like Rocky 10 Jagdpanzer with its SS-11 missiles. Any tank that carries the SS-11 missile. It can stop the IT-1, woohoo, but the only heat round that can penetrate it from any range is the Leopard 2K, with the penetration of, let me take a look here, 650 millimeters of pen. Yeah, most powerful heat round in the game. Now, the M60. M1 Abrams stock shell, the let me pull it up. The M735 shot is stock with 360 millimeters of penetration at 10 meters. It's immune to its own gun essentially from the front, as long as you don't aim for that trap shot underneath the turret neck. Or the turret neck, actually. And we're about to switch to the live gameplay at the moment. But for a brief starter, kind of makes you wonder how it will perform against its peers. So here we are on Middle East, appropriate map, and you're probably wondering why I'm using the Bundeswehr camouflage, sorry if I said that wrong, on the M1. Well, I was doing some research on the early M1 models, and there were some pictures, and I'll link them in the description below, of the M1 with the Bundeswehr camouflage found on most of the late-tier German tanks in War Thunder, such as the KPZ-70, Leopard A1A1, well, both Leopards, actually, and the Rocky 10 Jagdpanzers, and the Gepard. So, I thought, well, I thought I would use this camo on the M1 Abrams, because I thought I would use a user skin for it, because the default green just wasn't really suiting it well. So I decided to use this camo, and I think it looks nice. It'd be kind of nice if they had it as a default camouflage, considering that it does seem that some early M1 units were using this camouflage. So let's go back to what we were talking about its armor value. If the MBT-70 is facing right at it, and they're like less than 10 meters away, with a certain amount of luck, it can go through the upper plate. Or, excuse me, not the upper plate. the armor plating, whether it be on the turret or more realistically the hull. Now at range, it is completely immune from the MBT-70 from the front, or the M60A1 Rise passive. Yeah, Rise passive. And it's also immune to the T-64A from at least, if I recall correctly, about, I think about 100, I think it's 100 meters away. But let's go, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So all in all, the armor is not the best. It would be kind of nice if we could see the M1 A1 with an improved armor package. Although I can already hear some people in the background screaming, "No, too OP!" Well, it may be immune from the front, but the sides, at least on this Abrams, are like less than 80 millimeters thick. Yeah. So even like a Panzer IV could, or Panzer III even, could penetrate it from the side. Not the turret, but the hull. And when I was playing in a custom battle with some friends on the community help that are actually part of the community helpers team, one of the community helpers was in a Gepard, not the tier 5 one, but the tier 1 Gepard, the Panzer 38 Gepard. And he was able to pen me with default ammo from the rear. Now obviously that's understandable, the rear tanks are not really meant to get shot from the rear, because usually you'll have protection from the rear by infantry or other tanks. You usually would not allow an enemy tank to get right behind you and shoot you in the butt. No pun intended. But, all in all, it would be kind of nice to see a meta, the old meta where armor actually meant something. Because I remember a time when the only way you could penetrate some heavy tanks, such as the Tiger, for example, was from the side or the rear. It was like, there was a time where it was next to impossible to penetrate it from the front. If you had even at APCR or APC-BC, you were not going to go through. Now obviously now, the Tiger can get penned from the front by cough cough, cheat FS from like the M46. Still don't know why it has that heat round, but I can't complain because I don't really play the M46 or face it that often. Or if I do face it, they don't always use heat. Because certain kinds of heat rounds, I don't know, they just don't always one-shot. And sometimes they do minimal damage. But that's a story for another day. Now you're probably wondering, why am I going up against mostly AI? Well, you see, the dev server is meant for testing, and there's not a lot of players on the dev server at any given time in the game while it's open. For various reasons, either people cannot participate, like if they're on a console or a Mac, or, let me rephrase that, I believe you can if you're on a Mac. Don't quote me on that because I don't have a Mac or a Linux. But nevertheless, you cannot participate on the dev server if you have a console. You can only do it on PC, maybe Mac and Linux, but not PS4. So yeah, that's mainly why you see bots instead of mostly players. And the other benefit to bots is that, I don't know if this is true on the live server, but on the dev server, whatever bot you destroy is equivalent to a player being destroyed. Which helps because bots most of the time are pretty easy to face, as you see here. They're really low tier, like tier 3 and tier 4, and the occasional tier 5. And yeah, you see me getting wrecked by Leopard A1A1 with the new APFS DS shell. Now, unfortunately, I accidentally pressed spacebar during the battle. Not during recording, but during the battle. So that means you can't see how he penetrated my armor, and I already forgot. I think it was like a trap shot, like beneath the turret ring, which is a very obvious weak spot, which I'm not going to say which other tank shot me there, but I was really upset when that puny tank was able to get me there, and I was like, really? Nice aim. I mean, in real life, that probably would be a very hard area to hit, but in the game, it's fairly easy. Now, going back to briefly to the stock round, it obviously does good against most other tanks that are like 8.7 and below, like that Leopard A1A1 there. But with only 360 millimeters of penetration at 10 meters, it's going to struggle against some of its peers from the front, like the T-64A and B, especially the B, and the Challenger Challenger 1. We don't have the Challenger 2 yet, if ever. Now you're probably wondering, but you don't face the Challenger 1. That's true, you don't in realistic, but in arcade, you can face it. And you can face other Abrams that might have that expensive shell that's like 1,600 lions a piece, and that shell is, let me pull it up, the M774 with 415 millimeters of pen. So at a distance of at least 500 meters, you can pen the Abrams from the front. Or actually, any distance up to 2,000 meters. Because I keep thinking that it's 400 millimeters of effective thickness for kinetic, but it's actually 380. I don't know why I keep confusing it, thinking it's 400. But nonetheless, it is still a very powerful shell. But the stock shell for the M1 Abrams, the M735, 360 millimeters of pen at 10 meters, that's not going to be enough to penetrate the Abrams from the front, or the T-64A, and especially the T-64B. I mean, the T-64B has, as a stock round, where'd it go? The 3BM15 with 440 millimeters of pen at 10 meters. That's not even enough to penetrate itself from the front if you're aiming for the hull. Now I discount the lower plate because in the heat of a battle or at range, the odds of you hitting that lower plate, unless you're an expert marksman, are slim. Or if he's distracted. Now you might notice in the video that I'm highlighting the chat. That's something new. For several patches it never worked. And I was just curious to check it out. I was like, hey, it actually works now. So I apologize if it's distracting. So I closed it off shortly after. But anyhow, the T-64's best upgradable APF-SDS shell, Tier 4 modification, can't even pen its own hull at 10 meters. Its best pen is 475 millimeters of pen. Yeah, let that sink in. The most powerful kinetic round in the game. I can't even believe it. It can penetrate the Challenger 1 and the Abrams from any range. And when I say any range, generally you don't... the Sabo's, or even any round, basically's accuracy, that's not a missile, loses significant accuracy past 2,000 meters. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible to engage targets past 2,000 meters, but you generally don't see them that far because we don't really have maps that are that flat for that big of a distance, because that's like 2 kilometers right there. That's a pretty good distance, and the average tank map is like 2x2 or 4x4 kilometers in a square. So yeah. So it's going to be interesting to see how any of these tanks perform in real battles. Am I worried about the Abrams protection? Reasonably. I would have liked it to have been better, at least for the front. You know me, wanting that old meta back. But I'm basically going to treat it like the MBT-70 and the Leopards, where armor isn't what's important, it's whoever gets the shot first. And I'll probably be flanking with this if I see that there's like T-64s or Challengers. Because although I played this in realistic, I'll probably do a mix of both realistic and arcade. Now, a brief mention as to why I like arcade above realistic is because you can respawn up to 3 times in your tanks if you die early, no problem. But if you die with with no kills or only a certain amount of kills in a tank, generally that means you go straight back to the hangar, or you have to take an SPAA. I kind of wish they could disable the crew lock for if you have SPAA left, because generally you only want to use it either if you have a chance of winning, or if you know there are aircraft to go after. And sometimes, like during a steamroll, for example, there's not always aircraft to go up against. And another reason why I like arcade better, or I favor it more than realistic, don't get me wrong, I do like realistic for the challenge of having to look around and wondering where the enemy be, or sometimes you can like drive past them and they never see you, but sometimes you just want to relax. And arcade gives you that freedom to relax by having markers, which I would not have been able to see here until the replay, because in realistic, markers for enemy units are turned off. And plus the vehicles can move faster, and occasionally you can win enough points to temporarily spawn in a plane. Or other times, like for example, if let's say I'm in the Abrams and I get destroyed early on, I don't have to worry about getting sent back to the hangar right away. I can spawn up to 2 more times in other vehicles, and at least 1 other time in the Abrams if I have a backup vehicle, which I did for this battle. And so, in realistic battles, it can have, they go by factions, which can be like, for example, U.S. versus, or Allies versus Axis versus Allies, or NATO versus Warsaw Pact, or mixed factions, which can be as odd as the United States and Britain and Japan against the Russians, Germany, and the French. I mean, it sounds funny, but sometimes, I don't know, like some sides have better vehicles than others, or others have better close air support than other sides. So balancing that can be a very difficult balancing act. But in arcade, at least, like, it's possible to face yourself. An Abrams versus an Abrams, or a Challenger versus a Challenger. You might think, why would I want to verse myself? Well, to put it in simple terms, rather than restrict the 2 sides by the factions, you basically restrict them by the vehicles they have in their lineups. So, for example, it's not absolute balance, but at least both sides have roughly, and I'm not saying perfectly equal, but roughly equal numbers of vehicles in terms of battle ranking. If I want to challenge, I do realistic. If I just want to relax and grind, I do arcade. And it'll be kind of interesting to see, because at 8.7 vehicles, for example, like the M60 A1 Rise Passive, or the T55, or even the T62, with their best rounds, they're not going to penetrate the frontal armor of like the Abrams, or especially the T64B. So it'll be interesting to see how that's balanced. But the king of frontal protection has to go to the T64B. I didn't use it on the dev server except through test drives, but when I went up against it, it was tough. So it'll be interesting to see how that's all balanced. And one other thing I'd like to highlight on is that there's 2 new-ish maps being added. They're not brand new maps, they're older maps made bigger, which are surroundings of Volokholamsk. Yeah, Volokholamsk and East European Providence, which are based off of the standard Volokholamsk maps and Eastern Europe map, respectively. It's a small step, but it would be nice to have significantly larger tank maps, especially with rank 6 ground forces vehicles. Would they be big enough for enduring confrontation? No. For tier 1, maybe, tier 1 and 2. But 3 and up, you would need bigger maps. And for like rank 6, you would probably need a 10 by 10 square kilometer map, which would not only be difficult to develop, but it would only be useful in enduring confrontation, and even then, would that be big enough? Only testing could tell the results. I wish they would do like enduring confrontation for tanks, because the times I've played it on planes, like if I felt like doing it, they can be pretty fun. So it would be nice to see enduring confrontation at maps for tanks. And one thing I would like to see, and Fly Daily mentioned this in his video, and I'm pretty sure other people share this view, is game modes. Game modes, game modes, game modes. It would be really cool to get more game modes. Now, I'm not talking about like arcade or realistic or anything. I'm talking about like there's domination, there's battle, there's conquest, there's break, the latter of which I used to hate, but I actually haven't gotten break in ages. So it was probably removed. Either that or it's just simply not available for rank 5, rank 6 ground forces. So like what kind of game modes could there be added? Like one old idea I remember reading on the forum a while back was capturing the cargo. And this actually used to be in the game like back in 2014, but it got removed for unknown reasons, where there was a 4th zone in a domination map, which usually had 3 zones, and like a plane would crash and you had to recover the cargo, and if you captured zone D, your team, or actually the enemy team, would lose points. And someone suggested bringing that back, but sadly, since that suggestion was made in 2015, it hasn't been brought back. So something like that would be nice to do. This poor Leo. He tried to flank me, and I happened to hear his engine, and I was like, wait a minute, he's to my right. So I whip my gun around and wreck him. So, yeah, there are so many different suggestions for game modes and game mode ideas, more than even I could come up with, because, to put it simple, most ideas I have for game modes would mainly cater to player versus electronic or co-op, and just to put it in simple terms, there's not really a lot available for War Thunder PvE. It's mostly like for tanks it's Plants versus Zombies, and for planes it's just Interceptor. There's no use for player controlled bombers or attackers. It's only fighter, 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 interceptor, interceptor. But that's a story for another day. But yeah, I encourage you to go onto the forum and check out the different suggestions for game modes and give them some support. Who knows, maybe the developers will at some point decide, you know what, let's just go ahead and add some different game modes. And I would just love to see what could come to the game and make it even more dynamic and fun to play. Sorry, KPZ. Maybe next time. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, and until next time, peace out.